Welcome to episode 532 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Meyers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today I'm interviewing writer-director Jon Gun. He just completed the film The Unbreakable Boy, which is a heartwarming drama about a boy with autism and also brittle bone disease. Jon was a co-writer on the film Jesus Revolution, which was a film we covered here on the SYS podcast in episode 479, although I interviewed the directors of that film, not Jon, who was one of the writers. But today, Jon is on to talk about his new film, The Unbreakable Boy, and how that all came together for him. So stay tuned for that interview. SYS's six-figure screenplay contest is open for submissions. Just go to www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/contest. Our early bird deadline is March 31st. So if your script is ready, definitely submit now to save some money. We're looking for low-budget shorts and features. I'm defining low budget as less than six figures, in other words, less than $1 million US. We've got lots of industry judges reading scripts in the later rounds. We're giving away thousands of dollars in cash and prizes. The winners for both categories, we have a winner for both categories, shorts and features, and we even have some producers that are specifically looking for short scripts, so maybe we can find a home for some of these short scripts. If you want to learn more about the contest or enter the contest or see who some of our industry judges are, just go to our contest page at sellingyourscreenplay.com/contest. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking or sharing it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcasts, and then just look for episode 532. So just a couple words about what I'm actually working on. So I know I've been talking about this for a while here on the podcast, but I am gearing up to make another indie film this year. I finally have the script to where I feel it's good and ready to shoot, which notably does not necessarily mean other people aren't very critical of it for a whole variety of reasons. But as the artist, as the producer, as the director, I'm satisfied, pretty happy with it. So I'm moving into pre-production. The first thing is making sure all the financing is in place. I have some verbal commitments from various folks, but that's not the same as actually having the money in the bank and being able to start principal photography. So that's step number one. I've got to get that all squared away. But I've also got to find the bar where we're going to shoot. Probably 50% of this movie is going to take place in this bar. As written, it's a dive bar in the San Fernando Valley. I mean, the actual San Fernando Valley part is not that important, but it does, just for the story, it does need to be sort of a dive bar. If anyone knows or owns or knows someone who owns such a bar and they are very indie friendly, meaning they will rent it to us very cheaply, please drop me an email. I do sometimes get some really interesting emails from folks that listen to the podcast, and it's oftentimes very, very helpful. So if you know someone or know someone who knows someone who might be able to rent us their bar for a couple of weeks to shoot this film, please do drop me an email, just info@sellingyourscreenplay.com. Getting the right location is going to be a big part of this production because, as I said, so much of it takes place in this one location. I mentioned this a few episodes ago, but I'm going to be putting together a podcast of other low-budget filmmakers, and we're going to talk through the various stages of production, pre-production, actual production, post-production, and then distribution. I've got two other filmmakers lined up for this, and then obviously my film will make three. I'm hoping to get one more filmmaker, so there'll be four of us basically all doing very different films in terms of genre and in terms of sort of how we're doing them, but they're all very low budget and they're all very sort of manageable on sort of a low budget. So it'll be interesting. Again, it's just going to be us talking. We're going to talk about the different stages, and it's going to be hopefully a great way to share some of our knowledge and show other people how to make their own indie film. But also it'll be a way for us to start to promote our films and get our films out there into the world, and just get a little press, hopefully. So if you're working on a film or going to shoot something in the next few months, drop me a line, or perhaps you can be a part of this series as well. All these films, and I think sort of keeping them in the same scope is important. All these films are going to be in, let's say that, $25,000 range. in terms of budget. So these are pretty low budget guerrilla films. Some of them will be a little higher, some of them will be a little lower, but it's definitely going to be, I would say ultra low budget. A lot of sort of guerrilla filmmaking is going to be needed. Anyway, that's the main thing I've been working on lately, just gearing up. I've just been polishing the script. And that's the other piece to this. I'm going to, once I get my location locked, this bar, I have some other of the locations, this house that I'm filming this or recording this podcast in will be used heavily as one of the locations. So some of the locations that are in the script I already have. But once I get the bar, I really got to take a hard look at it. And then I will go back and try and rewrite the script a little bit, really to accommodate the specific bar we have. And in some cases, it'll just be, more of just sort of the location, using all the rooms, maybe not having some rooms, like I wrote a dish room where they are washing some dishes in the back and this, and some of these things might not actually be available in our location. So I'll need to probably do another quick pass on the screenplay. Not so much to change story or character or structure or anything like that, but just to sort of hone it for these location, and especially this bar location, because as I said, so much of our film is going to be shot there. So anyways, that's the main thing I am gearing up for. Do stay tuned for more updates as I get further into pre-production. Hopefully I'll have some nice updates as this thing moves along. Anyways, that's what I've been working on. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I am interviewing writer and director Jon Gunn. Here is the interview. Welcome, Jon, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show with me today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So to start out, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up and how did you get interested in the entertainment business?
I was born in Southern California and always loved watching movies and always kind of dreamed of making movies. And then, there wasn't a lot of opportunity in the 80s to figure that out. So I had some friends, we got camcorders and we started shooting our own movies in high school. Went to film school, Ithaca College in the mid 90s. And I wanted to direct films, but I realized that I was going to need to learn to write to give myself things to direct. And so I actually accidentally fell into screenwriting just out of necessity and found that was the most compelling way to find stories that I felt personally connected to, was to write those stories myself. Mm-hmm. So I started, right out of film school. I just sort of decided I was never going to take a real job and I was going to just struggle my way through it. And I read every screenwriting book I could, and I wrote a whole bunch of things. Had a writing partner that he and I were friends in high school and film school, and just were writing and writing and writing for years, just struggling through, trying to get something developed that we could make. I directed my first film that I wrote when I was like 25 years old. Just raised some financing and about $1 million and made an independent film called Mercy Streets. And that sort of continued to sort of roll into my next series of projects. Funny enough, probably one of my earliest hit film was an unscripted film called My Date with Drew. It was a comedy documentary, but we sort of shaped it. And it was interesting for me just to see that like the storytelling of a documentary still has to have the structure, that keeps audiences interested in. And that launched into a whole career for me as a screenwriter, really writing studio movies. I wrote 5 or 6 movies for DreamWorks Animation, and then I went on and wrote a bunch of movies for studios while I was simultaneously developing and directing films of my own.
Okay, gotcha.
So it's always been a combination of writing and producing and directing at the same time.
Mm-hmm. So just a couple of sort of off-topic questions. Why did you go to Ithaca when you grew up in Southern California? Why not go to film school in Southern California? What was the draw to Ithaca?
Well, I actually moved around quite a lot. And so by the time I was in high school, I was living in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Okay. And my best friend, Jon Mann, was like a high school filmmaker. And he taught me a lot of my sort of early lessons about how to put films together. And he and I both went to Ithaca together. And it was just like, it had a great film program. It also had a great music program. And I wanted to be a composer and a director. So it was the perfect school for me.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. So let's dig into your latest film, The Unbreakable Boy. Maybe to start out, you can just give us a quick log line or pitch. What is this film all about?
The Unbreakable Boy is a story about Scott Lorette and his wife, Teresa, who, met each other and got pregnant on their fourth date and realized, okay, we're going to raise this child. We're going to raise this child together. But they were unprepared. They didn't know each other that well. And then they had a child named Austin who had both brittle bone disease and autism, which is a very rare combination. It made him like 1 in a billion kid. And so it's really the sort of charms and struggles of this young couple learning to raise a child with autism and brittle bone disease and learning along the way about themselves, about each other. And this child, Austin, has this incredible spirit and this charming worldview. And so he narrates the story of his parents. And we get to watch the story of Scott and Teresa through the eyes of this 13-year-old child with autism.
I got you. So this originally was a book by Scott Lorette and Susie Flory. Were they are they the actual parents of Austin?
Scott is, Susie co-wrote
Okay.
With Scott. His wife is Teresa. So it was like a really charming book that was sort of very anecdotal about like 20 years of their life experience, meeting, having this child, raising this child, and their family and all the adventures of their family. And so I got it put on my desk by Peter Facinelli, who is one of our producers and who, is in the film. He's one of the actors in the film. He just read the book, met the family, loved it so much, brought it to us with tons of passion and said, we have to make this. And I read it at just the perfect time in my life. We were in quarantine. COVID had just hit. I was looking for another project to write. And this was a story that I found so inspiring and so much about gratitude that I really wanted to share that at that time with the world. And we already had a project with Zach Levi lined up, American Underdog. So I sent him the script. He read it and was just like in instantly. And so we went to Oklahoma in quarantine still and shot American Underdog and Unbreakable Boy back to back with Zach in Oklahoma.
Okay, wow. So maybe you can just give us sort of a breakdown. So you get this book, but nobody had attempted a screenplay draft or to convert it to a screenplay. That was all on you basically to convert this book, correct?
Right.
And so maybe you can talk about that process a little bit.
Yeah.
What did you have to trim, and were there some other elements that you had to add to kind of give it a little more structure, film structure? Just maybe talk about that process a little bit. What did you change and what did you keep?
Yeah, happy to. I've done a lot of adaptations and a lot of true stories, actually. So, I always find that the challenge is just boiling down the story to its essence. Like, what is the point of view and what is the story we want to share? And then figuring out with a book like this, which is a true story and has 20 years worth of anecdotes, I just sort of pulled all my favorites, and then just looked at it kind of on the table of like, all right, we know we have a love story of a husband and wife. We know they have this child. At what age do we want to spend most of the story, right, for this kid? And I settled on him being the 13-year-old, like the transition for him going into high school seemed like or into middle school seemed like a good moment because it's just filled with all kinds of, struggles and concerns and funny stories. And so I just basically created a shape of the story that when narrated from the point of view of the child, and that was a big breakthrough for me early on. Austin's voice is so unique. His worldview is so funny and magical and whimsical that I wanted to let him be the voice of this thing. And then he would tell the story of his parents meeting, falling in love, having him. And that because of the way he thinks, he counts things a lot and he's fascinated with the details of things, that he would lay out all the different times that he had broken bones in his life because he's got brittle bone disease. And he would count his parents' dates and he would count his years and his experiences. And so it gave me a structure that was really useful, that it would be like, all right, this is a man, Scott Lorette, who struggles with alcoholism and had really, hit rock bottom at a certain point in the story. So I knew that rock bottom was going to be useful for me. And that if you have a book called The Unbreakable Boy, about a boy with brittle bone disease and a father who is broken in his own way, then why don't we shape it around where he broke the most and then tell the story, as framed by here's the various times in my life when things have broken, and there's just a lot of thematic ideas that you can imagine, you can look at that through that lens of breaking, and about that the healing from breaking is what makes us unique, and that there's beauty in the way that we can heal from our brokenness. So there's that metaphor of like the broken teacup, that when you glue it back together, you paint the seams with gold to celebrate that those things make it special. And So, so I started with just that, the title, the concept of a kid with brittle bone, the idea of brokenness and struggling through brokenness, and then about how families can help heal us in our brokenness and make us more beautiful on the other side. And it wasn't difficult to find that with a boy like Austin, who had such a positive spirit and such a joyful worldview, that to find the idea of gratitude in the midst of struggle was sort of the gift of the story, and that the father could learn that lesson from his son.
Hmm. How much do you have to be true to the original authors or even true to this family? I mean, you're dealing with sensitive subjects, so you don't want to necessarily, you don't want to alienate the family that this story is about, obviously, but you might have to lean into certain things dramatically. You're talking about alcoholism, you're talking about really serious things. Just how do you feel, just a commitment to being true to what the family experienced versus being true to expressing this film as a sort of own creative entity?
Yeah. That's always the challenge with true stories, but I find in almost all of the circumstances where I've done adaptations of real life stories that I just communicate with the real people a lot. And I say, like, what are you comfortable with? What do you want to share? And let's find a version of the story that you're going to be proud of to share with the world, but that's still compelling and entertaining for an audience. And so they were, in this case, the Lorette family were very sort of open and unflinching and being willing to share their struggles. Scott Lorette wrote the book to share all of these struggles. He goes on, he does speaking tours and shares these struggles with people and how he recovered from them and how his family healed them. So because they knew that the brokenness was an important part of their journey and redemption, they were very open. And then it was just about choosing the right moments and then trying to reflect. What I always find is, like, doing an adaptation, you want to reflect the essence of the truth of the story. So, the dates might be different or certain characters might be consolidated, but if you squint at it, it's exactly the experience of what they want to share. And, we talk often with true stories about how this isn't going to be a photograph of their life. It's going to be a painting of their life. It's an interpretation of it. And the important thing is to get the spirit of it and the heart of it right. And I think they feel so deeply like this reflects their true journey. They love this movie. We've all become family, and I don't think they could be happier with what we've got.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. So one thing that occurred to me, I remember years ago when Life is Beautiful came out, some of the initial reactions were sort of that, you're dealing with this sort of very sensitive subject in sort of a lighthearted way. And obviously, Time that won all the Academy Awards, so that wasn't sort of the general perception. But I wonder, a movie like this, do you have experience with autism? Have you been around it? You always want to be real careful with something like this about how you approach it, as not to be offensive. You're also, at the end of the day, you got to make money. So you have to have something that's dramatic, that's going to be entertaining.
Yeah.
Just how did you deal with that? Do you have experience with autism? Was there some part of your life that you could sort of bring to this? Did you do research? How did you handle something like that?
Yeah, it's a great question because, first of all, I do have many people in my life who have autism, who have children with autism. There are people in my family with autism. I think I think you recognize as soon as you look at a story like this that most people in the world are 1 degree away from somebody who has autism or someone who's neurodivergent. And so it wasn't hard at all for me to access truth from my own life in that. Also, the family, Scott and his family who wrote the book and whose life it's about, were extremely available to us. And then we also had autism consultants. We had the script read multiple times by multiple people for sensitivity of understanding, like, how can we reflect this true story in a way that's compelling, in a way that is entertaining, like you said, but in a way that's also sensitive to all the fact that very often people with autism aren't reflected accurately or frequently or well. And I really wanted the community of people either with autism or have autism in their life. I want them to be happy and to embrace this movie. So I hope that we did that justice, and that it's just, I've heard so much good feedback so far. Just the fact that it's a story that's told from the point of view with the person about who has autism, but also that it's like, we're not overly earnest about it. It's like this is a very common thing. There's a lot of people with autism. There's lots of different kinds of people with autism, and so that's this story. This is one person's experience. Who has autism and brittle bone disease as well, which is another condition that's more unique that not as many people are impacted by. But yeah, of course, I hope so much. This is a love letter to the experience of this family. And part of their experience is autism. And so for people who have autism or are impacted by it, I would hope that they would see this film and feel that it's a celebration and a beautiful and authentic representation of that experience.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your writing schedule and sort of just how you put pen to paper. I think this will be interesting. And I'd be curious to hear sort of your comments, how that maybe differs if you're writing a spec script. It sounds like with this one, the novel came in, you had the producer on board. So you knew you were writing this to make it. There probably were some deadlines involved. Maybe you can walk through that writing process. How long do you spend just doing an outline, note cards, and how long do you spend in final draft? And what does deadlines look for something like this when you're converting it and you have a schedule you want to go shoot it?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, it's funny, deadlines can be our greatest friend in many situations when it comes to writing. I'm pretty diligent and disciplined about writing. I've been doing it for a lot of years. When this particular project came, it was an interesting moment because I was about to direct another film that got shut down because of COVID. So I found myself in my home with nothing to do, and we had a development deal with Lionsgate, and it was like, we need another project, something that we could shoot in quarantine. And that book had just fallen on my desk, and I was like, I just read The Unbreakable Boy. I actually think it would be a perfect project. And my partner, John Irwin at the time, was like, do it, write it, just start tomorrow. Like, let's see if we can get something written, because everyone in the filmmaking community was trying to figure out how to make anything during quarantine. And so this was a small enough story that we thought we could pull it off. So I literally started right away. I think I wrote the script I probably spent 2 weeks just thinking about it. Like, how am I going to break this down? I loved the idea right away of telling it through the voice of Austin, because his voice in the book was so unique. And every time all of his dialogue and all of his thoughts were so interesting that I wanted to put them all on screen. So then I thought, oh, this is cool. I'm going to use the kid's voice to narrate the parent's story. So then I just took and laid out all the stories from the different chapters and pulled my favorites, and then tried to figure out how can they all fit? Like, how am I going to span 20 years in one story? So I started to come up with a structure. Like, the first act could be the love story where they meet, they fall in love, they find out they're pregnant, they have a child. Then when are we going to learn that he has autism? And then let's move through the various years of his life to get him to the age where our kid will be for most of the film. So how can I crunch those stories into that window of when he's a toddler, and when they find out he's got brittle bone disease, and then when he, age him up to 13, so we can now live with the 13-year-old through an extended piece of the story. And then it was about like, well, what happens when he's 13? Where's the shape? And because I had a father who was struggling with alcoholism, that gave me a real good rock bottom that I knew would be a good end of Act 2, right? So we'd sort of plant this brokenness in the parent, explore the brokenness and the struggles and the highs and lows through falling in love, having a child, learning your child that has brittle bone, autism, struggling yourself through all of those things, and then finding redemption from that rock bottom with the support and love of your wife and your family. And then to recognize that as a parent, we often feel like we fail, and we often feel like we have to fix our kids if they're struggling. And in this particular case, this child and his incredible spirit and optimism would help to heal the father. And so I gave myself a pretty solid structure there of like, I think I understand how I'm going to tell this story from Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3 to give emotional shape to all that, and then find whimsy and levity, and then the depths and the brokenness. And so you sort of start looking at, these are the themes I'm exploring. This is the shape of the story. Here's the highs and lows and points I want to sort of balance, so that it's never too sad, it's never too earnest, but it finds a good combination of happy and weird and funny and sad, and then that becomes this mix, hopefully, of a real beautiful emotional experience.
But that's a 2-week process doing all that. Are you writing things down on note cards and an outline? And then how long does it take you to actually bash out that draft once you have all that done?
So I usually start to get a pretty good sense of my act breaks, and I start to drop note cards of a lot of different ideas and see where they fit. And then I usually, before I start writing, I will figure out the shape of what all the scenes are. So I'll create a treatment or a beat sheet, where I kind of have a summary of every scene. And I'm like, then I start to find out I have too many scenes in the beginning of Act 2. Like, it's taking too long to get to Austin at 13. And that's always a problem, right? It's so often when you've got a good story that's got a lot of good material, you can find yourself saying, I know that when I watch the film, I'm going to want to get to the 13-year-old version of Austin as soon as I can. But is there any way to take any of these ideas or scenes and move them from his youth to when he's 13? Some of them, yes, some of them, no, right? How quickly can I consolidate and condense the courting and the dating and the finding out that, that they're pregnant and all that? And so I just write a bunch of it. And with this particular case, more so than usual for me, I started writing before I had it all figured out, because there were some scenes I really wanted to explore to find the voice. Like, I wanted to write the scenes where Scott and Teresa met for the first time. And I wanted to try some of the voiceover in some of the sequences. So I just started writing scenes that I found charming and fun. And then that got me going. And then after a couple of weeks of doing that, I was like, all right, I'm going to now spend 8 weeks and I'm going to write the script in 8 weeks. And that's what I did. I wrote it in 8 weeks. And the first draft was very close to the draft we made. I mean, it happened very quickly. I sent it to my partners. They were like, oh my gosh, we love this. And I did a quick polish on it for probably a week or two to adjust some notes and crunch it down and dial it in. And then we sent it to Zach Levi. He read it on a Friday, called us on Saturday and said, I'm in. And we were off to the races. So this is very rare how quickly this happened. And honestly, it was only because of COVID that this happened. I would have been making another film, but I wrote it out of necessity. I wrote it quickly because we needed something. It got greenlit because we already had a project with Zach, and because we wanted to make something in COVID. And so and this was a story about gratitude. And honestly, I was just the gratitude of how fast the experience went and how well it went. It really reflected, I think, in the film. We didn't have much of an opportunity to overthink it. We just sort of went with the momentum of it.
Gotcha. So how can people see The Unbreakable Boy? What is the release schedule like going to be?
It comes out in a few weeks, comes out February 21st, nationwide. And I'm so excited. We've had 2 false starts. It was supposed to come out a couple of years ago, and then that second wave of Omicron shut it down. And then we had strikes and other issues. And so this has been a delayed film that is finally seeing the light of day. And February 21st, we finally get to share it. I'm so excited.
Perfect. And I'd just like to wrap up the interview by asking the guest, is there anything you've seen recently that you thought would be really great to recommend to our mostly screenwriting audience? HBO, Netflix, anything you've been checking out?
Well, I will say I haven't had a lot of time to watch things lately because I'm in Greece producing the House of David, a series called House of David that's about the life of King David. But in my free time, I have gone back right now. I've been rewatching Better Call Saul. Which is maybe one of the greatest television series ever made. If you want to look at a show that's just every single character is so incredibly well painted. There's so much intelligence and charm. And so I'm a huge fan of Better Call Saul. So
okay, that's a great recommendation. It's been a while. Yeah, I need to go back and watch that too.
Oh my gosh, I never get tired of it.
What's the best way for people to keep up with what you're doing? Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, anything you're comfortable sharing, I'll round up for the show notes.
Sure. I'm not very good at keeping social media interesting, but I think I'm jgun12 on Instagram, so you can check me out there.
Perfect. Well, Jon, congratulations getting this film finished. Look forward to following your career. Good luck with it, and hopefully I'll hear back from you.
Thank you, Ashley, so much. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you. We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
A quick plug for the SYS Screenwriting Analysis Service. It's a really economical way to get a high-quality professional evaluation on your screenplay. When you buy our 3-pack, you get evaluations at just $67 per script for feature films and just $55 for teleplays. All the readers have professional experience reading for studios, production companies, contests, and agencies. You can read a short bio on each reader on our website, and you can pick the reader who you think is the best fit for your script. Turnaround time is usually just a few days, but rarely more than a week. The readers will evaluate your script on 6 key factors: concept, character, structure, marketability, tone, and overall craft, which includes formatting, spelling, and grammar. Every script will get a grade of pass, consider, or recommend, which should help you roughly understand where your script might rank if you were to submit it to a production company or agency. We can provide an analysis on features or television scripts. We also do proofreading without any analysis. We will also look at a treatment or outline and give you the same analysis on it. So if you're looking to vet some of your project ideas, this is a great way to do it. We will also write your logline and synopsis for you. You can add this logline and synopsis writing service to an analysis, or you can simply purchase this service as a standalone product. As a bonus, if your screenplay gets a recommend or a consider from one of our readers, you get to list the screenplay in the SYS Select database, which is a database for producers to find screenplays and a big part of our SYS Select program. Producers are in the database searching for material on a daily basis, so it's another great way to get your material in front of them. As a further bonus, if your script gets a recommend from one of our readers, your screenplay will get included in our monthly Best Of newsletter. Each month, we send out a newsletter that highlights the best screenplays that have come through our script analysis service. This is a monthly newsletter that goes out to our list of over 400 producers who are actively looking for material. So again, this is another great way to get your material out there. So if you want a professional evaluation of your screenplay at a very reasonable price, check out www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. Again, that's sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. On the next episode of the podcast, I'm going to be interviewing an Italian animation producer named Pietro Scito. I know I butchered that name, but as I said, he is Italian and has a real Italian name. He's done a number of animated projects as a producer, and I actually have an animation script I've been kicking around for a few years. I always liked it, but I've never been involved in a animation production. Don't really know how animation production works in quite the same way as I do sort of more the physical production. So hopefully I'm going to learn a lot, and hopefully I'm going to ask some good questions, and hopefully everybody listening will also learn something as well. So if you listen to this episode and you have some questions about animation production, email them to me, and maybe I can ask some of those questions to Pietro next month and get some answers. Because as I said, this is not a topic I know a lot about, just in terms of the workflow, budget, just how it actually goes. Who do you need? What level of competency do you need with animators with different roles in the production, and how we can potentially find those people. So those are all sort of going to be the questions that I'm going to be asking them. And as I said, it's going to be a real eye towards me trying to potentially maybe produce my own animated it's a pilot, I guess is what it is, a 22-page pilot script, animated pilot script. So as I said, everything I'm going to be asking him is going to be sort of through that lens about how can I then go out and produce this animated script. So if you have an animated script or want to learn more about animation production, keep an eye out for that episode next month. Anyways, that's the show. Thank you for listening.